It was supposed to be a normal Friday. Cool spring air filtered through the windows of Solaris Design Group's downtown office, and the buzz of casual conversation echoed across the open concept workspace. Eleanor Ward had just finished a long presentation, handing over a certificate of completion with a small smile to her boss. She was proud. After 4 months of hard work, she had completed the company's intern training program, for the 6th time in her 7 years there. Her boss, Curtis Lang, barely glanced at the certificate. "We're implementing team restructuring," he said casually, reclining in his leather chair. "Your position is being phased out. Effective immediately." Eleanor blinked. "Excuse me?" He tapped his desk with 2 fingers, like he was moving through a checklist. "Budget realignment. And thank you for everything, Granny." Granny. The word landed like a slap. Eleanor sat in stunned silence. She was 61, not fragile, not confused, certainly not anyone's grandmother at the office. For 7 years she'd been the steady hand at Solaris Design, the woman who knew the building codes by heart, who anticipated permit delays, who calmed nervous clients during stormy projects. She'd never missed a deadline. And now she was being thanked with a 2-word insult and a 2-week severance. "You'll need to return your badge," Curtis continued, avoiding eye contact. "HR will walk you through the exit process. Your final paycheck will be ready by noon." Still holding the intern training certificate, still warm from the printer, Eleanor finally stood. Her voice came out quieter than she expected, but steady. "And who will be managing the Windsor project approvals now?" "That development has a dozen outstanding municipal reviews. Jasmine will take it from here," Curtis replied, already glancing at his phone. Jasmine, 24, recent graduate, and the very intern Eleanor had spent 4 months mentoring. Jasmine had a sparkling personality, a popular design blog, and not a single day of experience navigating municipal bureaucracy until Eleanor showed her the ropes. Eleanor didn't argue. She didn't scream. She didn't even sigh. She simply nodded. "I see. Thanks again," Curtis said with forced cheer, already standing to signal the meeting's end. Eleanor left the office with her spine straight and her chin high. At the reception desk, Jasmine stood waiting, biting her lip like she'd just come from a party she wasn't sure she should have attended. "I had no idea this was happening," she said quickly. "Curtis only told me this morning. I thought." Eleanor cut her off with a raised hand. "It's all right, Jasmine. I hope the Windsor project treats you well." She walked past her without another word. What no one at Solaris Design realized, what they had completely overlooked, was that Eleanor wasn't just a senior coordinator. She was the sole holder of the liaison license between Solaris and the Department of Urban Planning. She had built that bridge. She had maintained it. And now, they were trying to cross it without her. 2 hours later, Eleanor sat in the front seat of her aging sedan, parked in the shade of an elm tree near the city's courthouse. The box of her personal items rested on the passenger seat, photos of her son, a coffee mug from a long-retired colleague, and a small desk cactus she'd managed to keep alive through 4 reorgs and 3 CEOs. She didn't cry. Instead, she pulled out her phone and called her daughter, Lena. "Mom?" Lena answered brightly. "You're calling early." "I got fired," Eleanor said, her voice flat. There was a pause, followed by sharp indignation. "What? Why? What happened?" Eleanor explained everything, the restructuring, the intern, the dismissive tone. The word granny. Lena's voice turned fierce. "That's age discrimination, Mom. You should sue them. Take them to court." Eleanor considered that. Maybe she would. But not yet. "Let's just say. I have other ideas," she murmured. That evening, Eleanor sat at her kitchen table with a pot of tea and her laptop. Her small bungalow in the outskirts of the city was cozy, filled with overstuffed bookshelves and decades of architecture magazines. The comforting weight of silence wrapped around her as she opened a folder titled, Ward Planning Services, Private Files. Years ago, Eleanor had established a small consulting company in her own name. It was never publicized. Solaris had hired her in part because of her connections and knowledge of the city's regulatory ecosystem, but they didn't know she had a separate business license that enabled her to file compliance documents as a third-party permit coordinator. In fact, many of Solaris's most complex projects had been submitted and cleared through her consulting license, legally filed under her name, through a private channel that couldn't be bypassed. This had been part of a city initiative to speed up critical infrastructure permitting by routing it through trusted professionals. Curtis didn't know. Jasmine certainly didn't. Without her signature, the Windsor project, and 2 others, could not advance. And she wasn't feeling particularly generous. She picked up her tea and scrolled through documents. Site approval letters, permit timestamps, approval codes. Everything was intact, everything traceable. She backed up the files onto a hard drive and uploaded a duplicate to a secure cloud storage folder. Then, she opened her email and began to draft a message. Not to Solaris. Not to Curtis. To the city's Permit Oversight Committee, to let them know Ward Planning Services was temporarily suspending all sign-offs related to Solaris design projects, pending formal clarification of roles, recognition, and compensation. She read over the message twice, then hit send. Monday would be interesting. Monday morning came without the usual routine. No blazer. No commute. No overpriced coffee from the kiosk across from Solaris Design's office. Eleanor Ward stood in her kitchen, whisking eggs for an omelette, the soft radio in the background playing an old tune she used to hum while drafting plans late into the night. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing. She wasn't chasing. She was waiting. At 9:13 a.m., the first call came in. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. Then came the texts, first from Jasmine, then from someone in HR, and finally from Curtis himself. Each message grew more urgent. Jasmine. Hey Eleanor. Do you have a sec? Something weird is going on with the Windsor submittals. HR, Carla. Hi Eleanor, would you mind giving us a quick call regarding your documentation for past project files? We're hitting a snag with city systems. Curtis. Need to speak ASAP. Call me directly. Miscommunication with city approvals. Need your insight. Eleanor sipped her tea. The city had received her email first thing that morning. Her firm, Ward Planning Services, had officially paused all regulatory activity connected to Solaris Design until contractual clarity and licensing issues were resolved. She had written it carefully, no threats, no accusations. Just precision. Because she wasn't out for revenge. She was building a boundary. By 10:42 a.m., the voicemails became more desperate. Curtis's voice trembled with forced calm. Eleanor, look, this is just a formality issue. I'm sure there's a way we can iron things out. We're all professionals here. At noon, she received a more formal email from Solaris's legal advisor, requesting her availability for a collaborative meeting to discuss regulatory continuity and potential transitional assistance. She almost laughed. Transitional assistance? As if she'd just wandered off and forgotten to leave a key under the mat. Instead, she forwarded the email to her attorney, Naomi Glass, along with all documentation showing Ward Planning Services' independence and its critical role in the Windsor project's permit path. Within hours, Naomi replied with a drafted response. Ms. Ward is under no legal obligation to continue services post-employment without an independent consulting agreement. We are open to discussing terms for her professional re-engagement, contingent on fair compensation and formal recognition of her role. Eleanor gave her approval. The message was sent. And just like that, the balance shifted. At Solaris Design, panic simmered beneath the surface. Jasmine, now officially acting as Eleanor's replacement, sat in a glass meeting room flipping through binders she didn't fully understand. City codes, permit timelines, zoning exceptions, it might as well have been ancient Greek. Did she explain how to submit the variance requests? She asked aloud. She said something about Wednesdays, muttered one of the project engineers. But I think it had to do with who was in the office, not the actual rule. Curtis stormed into the room, tossing a legal pad onto the table. She's refusing to cooperate unless we pay her a consulting fee. Jasmine paled. But we thought she was part of the staff when the permits were filed. No, Curtis growled. She filed them through her own firm. Her name is on the documents. Her signature is required. Without it, we're dead in the water. Jasmine sat back in her chair, stunned. She had assumed Eleanor was just a kind mentor, generous with her time, helpful with every form and checklist. She hadn't realized that Eleanor was the system. Meanwhile, Eleanor took a walk by the river. The sun shimmered off the water as construction sounds echoed faintly from distant sites. She stopped by a bench overlooking a project she'd helped approve 4 years ago, a community park with sustainable landscaping and native wildflowers. A young woman jogged by and smiled. You're Eleanor, right? From Ward Planning? Eleanor blinked. Yes. I work with city permits. You helped get our pilot housing block through in half the usual time. My supervisor still uses your spreadsheets. Eleanor smiled. Good to hear. That was the thing about real work. It lasted. It left traces. And eventually, it came back around. Tuesday morning, Curtis called again. This time, Eleanor answered. Eleanor, he said, the gloss gone from his voice. We'd like to formally offer you a consulting contract to finish the Windsor permits. We're prepared to offer your previous monthly salary, prorated. Eleanor took a breath. That's not acceptable. He hesitated. You're holding up progress. No, she corrected him. You're trying to walk across a bridge I built, and pretending I didn't lay the stones. Silence. I'll consider re-engagement, she continued, for $60,000 over the next 6 months, full public credit on project documentation, and a formal release of my termination record, clarifying that I was not removed for performance reasons. Curtis sighed audibly. That's steep. No steeper than the cost of resubmitting everything through standard channels. You'll lose 4 months, at minimum. He knew she was right. I'll need to get board approval. Then you should get started. She ended the call. That night, Eleanor received an email from a developer named George Wynn. He had worked with Solaris before, but now he was reaching out directly. Heard what happened? We've got 3 projects in early stages and need someone with your background. Would love to discuss bringing you on independently. She replied with a meeting time and a smile. This was only the beginning. She hadn't burned the bridge. She'd taken it back. And now, she'd decide who got to cross. The next few days unfolded like a quiet revolution. Eleanor Ward, once dismissed with a half-hearted budget cut and a condescending nickname, was now the name on everyone's lips in Omaha's development circles, not for scandal or drama, but for the undeniable truth. She had become essential. By Wednesday, Eleanor had 3 separate offers in her inbox. One from a boutique urban planning startup looking to borrow her wisdom. Another from a national construction firm seeking a regulatory consultant for a multi-state project. And the third, from Warren & Lee Developers, was more direct. We've followed your work for years. Your handling of the Lincoln Greenway project saved us months in approvals. We'd like to contract your firm exclusively for all upcoming developments in eastern Nebraska. Name your terms. It was tempting, but Eleanor wasn't rushing. For the first time in years, she had leverage, and she wasn't about to squander it. Instead of overcommitting, she met with George Wynn, the independent developer who'd reached out earlier in the week. They sat down over coffee at a quiet cafe tucked into the corner of the Old Market District. You've built something rare, Eleanor, George said after their second round of coffee. Trust. That's the currency most developers forget exists. You've got the trust of the city, the planning board, and frankly, even your competitors. Eleanor chuckled softly. I just kept my word. That used to be standard. Not anymore, George replied, shaking his head. That's why we're here. I've got 5 mid-scale developments in the pipeline. I want you on all of them. Consulting, compliance, permit strategy, whatever you want to call it, I just need to know you'll steer the ship. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out a notepad and began scribbling. After a few minutes of discussion, they had a tentative agreement, 6 months, a flat fee structure, milestone bonuses for early approvals, and an optional extension if both parties agreed. I'm not just a rubber stamp, she reminded him. I wouldn't want you if you were, George replied. As they shook hands, Eleanor realized something. This wasn't a comeback. This was reinvention. That afternoon, Curtis Lang finally called with an offer that met her terms. $60,000 in consulting fees over 6 months. Public credit as the lead compliance advisor for the Windsor project. And a formal HR document retracting any suggestion of poor performance. She didn't celebrate. She simply forwarded the details to Naomi, her attorney, and waited for her approval. When the legal team cleared it, she replied with one line. Acceptable. I will begin reviewing the outstanding documents tomorrow. The irony wasn't lost on her. They fired her on a Friday. She'd reclaimed control by the next. Back at Solaris, the atmosphere was grim. Jasmine, once giddy with the promise of fast promotions and social media acclaim, now sat buried beneath zoning ordinances and municipal code books she barely understood. After submitting 2 applications incorrectly and delaying a third project, she had been quietly reassigned to community engagement, a polite term for PR cleanup. Curtis, meanwhile, had been summoned to multiple meetings with the board after other clients raised concerns about Eleanor's departure. One developer had already pulled a project from the firm, citing a breakdown in institutional continuity. But Eleanor didn't gloat. She barely thought about them now. Her focus had shifted entirely. By the end of the week, Eleanor had signed 2 additional contracts and was negotiating a third. She converted her guest room into a proper home office, filing cabinets on one wall, a massive whiteboard on the other. The old leather office chair she'd rescued from a liquidation sale years ago now sat proudly behind her vintage walnut desk. She hired a part-time assistant, Claire, a sharp woman in her 50s who had recently been downsized from another planning firm. Eleanor didn't need a resume, she trusted experience, intuition, and work ethic, qualities you couldn't teach in a seminar or post on a LinkedIn profile. "We're not building a company," Eleanor told Claire during their first team meeting, "we're building a legacy. I want people to come here and feel like they're part of something that respects what they know." Claire nodded, eyes gleaming. It's about time someone did. They worked long hours in those first few weeks, reviewing documents, advising on pre-approval packages, and offering workshops to developers who never understood the value of proper compliance planning, until they'd lost time and money because of it. Eleanor's name became synonymous with professionalism, clarity, and respect for the system. Not the rigid bureaucracy of red tape, but the system that ensured cities were built safely, legally, and sustainably. A month later, Eleanor stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new low-income housing complex she'd helped push through a tricky set of zoning variances. Cameras flashed. City officials gave short speeches. A young mother with 2 kids moved into a bright, clean apartment that might never have existed if not for Eleanor's signature on a half-dozen approvals. As she stood in the crowd, someone tapped her on the shoulder. It was Jasmine. She looked nervous. Diminished. "Ms. Ward," she said softly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't know what I didn't know." Eleanor nodded. "You still have time to learn. But next time, understand the weight of the ladder you're climbing. Don't step on people you may have to reach for later." Jasmine flushed, nodded, and walked away. Eleanor turned back toward the podium, her presence quiet but commanding. That evening, back at her desk, Eleanor opened a blank document. At the top, she wrote, "Ward Planning Principles, a Code of Integrity." She was ready to share everything she'd learned, not just about permits and regulations, but about leadership, mentorship, and resilience. She would build something lasting. Something that couldn't be cut with a budget spreadsheet or undermined by trendy hires. Something that could outlive even the sharpest corner office politics. Because this time, she wasn't anyone's employee. She was the architect of her own future. Eleanor Ward walked into Omaha's downtown municipal building with a quiet sense of purpose. Clad in a tailored gray coat, her hair pulled neatly into a low bun, she no longer looked like the woman who had been dismissed with a patronizing granny comment. She looked like someone who belonged at the head of the table, and everyone who saw her that morning treated her accordingly. A year ago, Eleanor was just another project coordinator behind the scenes. Now, she was a name people referenced in meetings with deference. Developers requested her by name. City officials sought her insight. Reporters followed her trail. She had become more than a consultant, she was a symbol of what happened when experience wasn't just acknowledged, but respected. Today, she was finalizing a series of new expedited permit guidelines being piloted by the city, guidelines she had helped design. It was the kind of work that once happened behind closed doors, shaped by people like her but never credited to them. Now, it was her signature on the policy drafts, her face at the stakeholder review meetings. Her business, Ward Planning Services, had grown rapidly over the past few months. What began as a solo act was now a lean, well-run team of 4. Claire, her assistant, had quickly become an operations expert. 2 newly hired permit analysts, both women in their 50s who had been overlooked by their previous employers, rounded out the team. Eleanor had become a magnet for those who still had drive but were told they were past their prime. She didn't just hire them, she empowered them. Their motto was printed in elegant font on their new letterhead. Experience builds better cities. Meanwhile, back at Solaris Design, the cracks had become craters. Curtis Lang was under intense pressure from both clients and the board. The Windsor project had fallen behind schedule again after Eleanor shifted her attention to new, higher-paying clients. Though she had fulfilled the consulting contract they begged her to accept, she had no interest in extending it. Worse, other clients had noticed that any project not routed through Eleanor seemed to hit regulatory snags. Delays. Extra reviews. Phone calls not returned. The message was clear: the bridge Curtis had burned was no longer his to cross. By summer, 2 of Solaris's largest clients withdrew. One moved to a firm Eleanor now consulted for. The other cited concerns over regulatory stability. Jasmine had resigned quietly and taken a job at a marketing firm, pivoting away from development entirely. Curtis tried to spin it internally as a career change, but the whispers said otherwise. Back at Ward Planning, Eleanor was too busy to think about them. She was preparing for the Heartland Greenways Initiative, a multi-phase sustainable development project spanning 5 Nebraska cities. She wasn't just consulting on it, she was co-leading it. At a round table of city officials and developers, Eleanor laid out the plan: streamlined zoning overlays, early permit stage integration, and new digital review tools designed to reduce redundancy. Every part of it came from her decades of experience. And finally, people listened. "Your leadership has fundamentally changed how we handle approvals," said one council member. "You've saved us time, money, and mistakes." Eleanor simply smiled. "I've always believed that understanding the system isn't about red tape. It's about knowing where the corners are, and why they matter." At the end of the session, George Wynne, now a regular collaborator, approached her with a grin. "I've got a new project," he said. 2 city blocks. Mix of residential, commercial, and green space. "I won't break ground without you." "You'll need to book 6 weeks out," she replied. "We're backed up." "Good," he said. "You deserve it." That weekend, Eleanor returned home to her quiet neighborhood. She spent Saturday morning pruning her backyard garden, a simple ritual that had taken on deeper meaning since her departure from Solaris. Each plant was a metaphor: some required careful spacing, others needed regular trimming, and a few simply thrived when left alone. She thought about her career the same way. It had taken years to grow. Some moments required pruning, like letting go of places that no longer served her. Others needed patience and time. And in the end, it had blossomed into something richer than she ever could have imagined. Later, she opened her laptop and checked her inbox. One subject line stood out. Press request, Forbes Urban Leadership Profile, Eleanor Ward. She read the email with careful eyes. They wanted to feature her in a story about late career reinvention and the overlooked power of experience in urban planning. They'd seen the headlines. They'd read the city's new permit reforms. And they wanted to know how a soft-spoken consultant turned a firing into a citywide reckoning. Eleanor didn't care much for fame. But this was something else. This was a chance to change the narrative, not just for herself, but for the countless women like her who had been told to make room for someone younger, louder, shinier. She replied with a single sentence. "I'd be happy to share what I've learned." When the article went live, it was shared thousands of times. The title said it all. From dismissed to indispensable, how Eleanor Ward redefined what it means to be relevant. In it, she spoke not of revenge, but of resilience. Of reinvention. Of the deep, quiet strength of professionals who had spent decades absorbing knowledge that couldn't be taught in a classroom. She spoke of her team. Her city. Her clients. And she spoke of a lesson no business school could offer. Respect isn't given when you speak the loudest. It's given when your work speaks for itself, and keeps speaking long after others have stopped. That week, a plaque was mounted in the city's planning department. In recognition of Eleanor Ward's contributions to regulatory innovation and urban development excellence. Curtis Lang read about it in the news. He sat in his office, smaller now, the team thinner, and stared out the window at the skyline Eleanor had helped build. She wasn't just a name he used to know. She was the future he couldn't be part of anymore. 6 months had passed since Eleanor Ward finalized her contract with the Heartland Greenways Initiative. What had begun as a modest consulting firm operating from her dining room table was now a fully operational office in a restored brick building near Omaha's old rail yard, an area she herself had once helped preserve through an adaptive reuse zoning measure. The brass plaque outside read, Ward Planning Services, Urban Compliance and Development Strategy. Inside, the office was alive with purposeful energy. The smell of strong coffee mingled with the soft tap of keyboards. Framed permits, city commendations, and project launch photos lined the walls, not as trophies, but as reminders of battles won with tenacity, patience, and deep knowledge. Claire, now promoted to operations manager, reviewed contractor schedules with 2 new hires, both women in their 50s who had been laid off during recent tech firm mergers and were grateful for the chance to start fresh. One had a background in land use law, the other in environmental review. Neither had ever expected to find work that respected both their expertise and their timeline to retirement. Eleanor had built that bridge for them, just like she had rebuilt her own. That morning, Eleanor sat with city council members reviewing the pilot results from her permit streamlining framework. Submissions that once took 4 months now cleared in 6 weeks. Feedback loops had been reduced by 40%. Developers, for the first time in years, weren't dreading the paperwork. She spoke confidently, but without ego. Her influence was no longer questioned. "We didn't just change how fast things move," she explained. "We changed how much people trust the process." And trust, as she had learned the hard way, was the foundation of everything. Later that week, Eleanor hosted a private seminar for mid-career professionals considering a pivot into urban development. She stood before a room of 25 men and women ranging in age from 45 to 67. Some had been pushed out of previous roles. Others were simply craving purpose. All of them were carrying invisible scars, of being overlooked, underestimated, or quietly pushed to the side. Eleanor understood. She told them her story, not just the headlines and the triumphs, but the crushing stillness of that Friday morning when she was fired. How the dismissal cut deeper than she expected. How she had to choose between anger and action. And how she built something that no one could ever take from her again. "You don't need to be loud to be powerful," she said. "You just need to know your worth and refuse to let others define it for you." The room erupted into quiet applause. Several attendees came up afterward to thank her. One woman clutched Eleanor's hand and said through tears, "I thought I was too old to start over. But now I think, maybe I'm finally ready." In the months that followed, Ward Planning Services expanded again. Eleanor hired her first junior associate under a new program she created called Legacy Lines, a mentorship initiative designed to pair seasoned experts with second career professionals seeking new paths. It was open to people over 40 only, a deliberate move to reclaim space in an industry obsessed with youth. Applicants came from all over Nebraska, and soon, beyond. One of them, a former nurse named Marta, now shadowed Eleanor on city site visits. Another, a former engineer who had taken time off to care for aging parents, was helping digitize years of archived zoning records. Both brought skills that transcended traditional resumes. "You don't hire by LinkedIn filters," Claire joked one afternoon. "No," Eleanor replied with a smile. "I hire by heart and history." The biggest moment came that fall when the National Urban Development Council reached out. They were organizing their annual summit in Chicago and asked Eleanor to keynote a session titled "Rewriting the Second Chapter, Late Career Leadership in Modern Development." She had been invited before, once, years ago, when she was still under Solaris Design. But back then, Marla, another senior staffer, had taken the slot. Eleanor was thanked in a footnote. This time, there were no footnotes. Her face was on the summit program. At the event, she took the stage before an audience of architects, policymakers, community leaders, and rising planners. She wore a slate blue blazer and a quiet smile. No flash. No gimmicks. Just substance. She began with a story, not of triumph, but of being underestimated. "Someone once called me Granny," she said. The room chuckled, but she continued, "They said it like I was irrelevant. Like my time was up. What they didn't understand is that knowledge doesn't retire. It just waits to be remembered." She talked about compliance not as a hurdle but as a promise, that cities could grow with conscience. That experience wasn't a bottleneck, but a bridge. She ended with this. "If someone tells you that your best years are behind you, remember, they don't know what you've lived through. And they don't get to write your legacy. Only you do." The audience rose in a standing ovation. And Eleanor, for once, let herself feel it, not just the applause, but the peace. The vindication. The grace. The arrival. Back in Omaha, at the groundbreaking of the West Bank River Commons, a project Eleanor had guided from a stalled concept into full approval, reporters asked her what had changed most in the past year. She paused, glancing at the skyline, and said, "Not the city. Me. I stopped waiting for someone to recognize my value. I recognized it myself. And once I did, the city followed." That photo, Eleanor Ward in a hard hat, blueprint in hand, smiling against the backdrop of cranes and steel beams, made the front page of the Midwest Development Review. Its caption read, "The Permit Whisperer Who Rewrote the Rules." At 62, Eleanor had more influence than ever. More peace. And, most of all, more freedom. She wasn't climbing a ladder anymore. She was building one, for others to follow. One rung at a time. With no expiration date. And no room left for the word granny. Only architect. Mentor. Leader. And the kind of legacy that lasts long after the concrete sets.